think the broader question today is, what does Morsi's death mean for the region? If we think about President Morsi, the first democratically elected president of Egypt, was very popular and was taken in 2013 in a military coup. In the past 2 years, we've seen Human Rights Watch issue a report on his conditions. In 2018, you had a parliamentary delegation from the UK visit him and say that the conditions he was being held in would lead to this imminent death. The question is, where is the international community? The deeper question is not just what does his death mean for the Muslim Brotherhood, but what does his death mean for democracy in the region? We've seen the rise of President Sisi's popularity, not just in the United States and not just in Europe, but also in France, where the democratic aspirations of the January 25th revolution, the subsequent election of the democratic president, has been replaced with a total embrace of authoritarian regimes. And so the deeper question of what does President Morsi's death mean for Egypt is a deeper question, is about what is the status of democracy in the world today. And I think what we have to ask ourselves is, just as with the death of Prime Minister Hariri in Lebanon in 2015, why has the international community not called for an independent investigation? Why were there not independent people in the courtroom today? Why was he even in court today in an unannounced visit? Will there be an autopsy conducted? This was a former president of a nation that belonged to the United Nations, the Arab League, and the Organization of African Union, and there is no call for an investigation into his death, into the conditions he was held in, which were well documented. And so the question is, what does his death mean for democracy in the region and for justice?
Well, let me turn that question back on you. I mean, why has the international community stayed silent? Is this an ideological difference? Is this money? Is this economics? I mean, you'll be well aware the US administration is considering declaring the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization, despite it having political representation and support across the region. So why are we seeing this backlash or this movement against it?
So there's two reasons. When we think of opposition in the Middle East, or opposition movements in the Middle East, especially in a place like Egypt, you usually think of the Muslim Brotherhood. And what's been happening throughout the Middle East, not just in Egypt, but throughout in Saudi Arabia and in the UAE and in Turkey and in Yemen and through various aspects of the region, is the complete elimination of the opposition. And when the opposition is perceived as being the Muslim Brotherhood, then they become the greatest threat to the lingering aspects of authoritarian regimes. And so when President Sisi comes to President Trump here in the United States and says to him, designate the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization because they are an impediment to me, President Sisi, what you're starting to see is that the American president is actually helping the Egyptian president via himself and the UAE leadership to squash democratic aspirations. The Muslim Brotherhood is much more things than the former seat of the presidency. It's a social movement. It's an ideological movement. But more so, it's included in many political places all over the world, especially in places like Tunisia and the Nahda. And so the problem with the designation, the reason why it has failed for the past 2 years, is it is not possible. You can't eliminate voices of opposition. You can't eliminate parts of political processes. You can't eliminate social movement. You can't eliminate charity movements. You can't eliminate ideas so that President Sisi can feel more secure about himself. And so the question is deeper, in that the Muslim Brotherhood really signifies opposition to authoritarian leadership in the Arab world. And so what we're seeing happen in the United States, but also in the silence coming out of Europe, but also in the increasing sales of military equipment from France to Egypt, is that the signal is democracy is not for the Middle East. We'll accept authoritarian regimes because they're in the West's best interest today. And the language of the war on terror has allowed for this to continue.